Alrighty. So I'm experimenting with adding music because it can be kind of boring just sitting in silence. So if let me know if I need to adjust the music volume because I'm using this pretzel thing that Chris Sevaleha told me about. So let's see if it actually works. Let me tweet. Okay. You're not hearing any music, Bhaskar? That's weird. Hmm. Try this. What about now? Okay. Interesting. So I have to figure out the audio volumes here. If I... Problem is that the audio is like, the music's like really loud in my ears. So I have to figure that out. All right, well, that'll work. Okay. So, if anybody was around for the last time I was working on this, I've made a lot of progress. I spent a lot of time working through how I want to structure this talk, and made a bunch of notes. Let's see if I can share some of this. So you can see I'm making a bunch of notes here about what I want people to learn from this talk, how I want to approach it, what kind of story I want, because I don't want just, I don't really like to just do like linear step-by-step instructions in talks, because I don't think that's interesting to people. I think people kind of tune out when they are just like told a linear series of steps to do. So I've been trying to come up with ways to add that layer of discovery to this talk. And so I'm actually going to make it a little bit more beginner focused than I originally anticipated. Just because authentication is difficult, NGRX can be difficult, so approaching them at the same time can be very intimidating if you're not sure what to do. Just for some reason, authentication sort of has this mystique or this like aura of difficulty around it. And I think the really interesting part about the differences between authentication in Angular versus NGRX is all the different moving pieces. And so you go to add, what I want to recreate is sort of like you go to add your authentication in regular Angular, you add your auth service, you have talk to your components, you have it talk to your data services with an interceptor, and you're like pretty much done. You don't really have anything to do from there. NGRX adds this whole other layer of complexity because of the indirection between your components and your reducers and things like that. So what I want to describe is that the The pure Angular way is just sort of a linear, like taking a walk, versus the NGRX way is more like riding a bicycle, where you're causing all these different things to happen. But it lets you go farther and do, farther and faster. It just takes a little bit more work to set up and maintain. So then we're going to go through state and actions and reducers and selectors and all that stuff. But I want to walk people through the process of like, okay, what kind of state do we need in this with regard to authentication? And then walk them through like how they would think through that process by thinking about what events are happening, what the flow is between these events, what pieces of state we need to define and keep track of, and then how we modify that state with actions and read that state with selectors and that kind of thing. I think I'm not even close to done here, but I think I probably already have enough content for a 25-minute talk. Ah, the music's dominating, huh? Okay. Let's turn that down. It's like it goes from everything to nothing. Let's see. If I turn that. How about now? Da-da-da-da-da. I've got it turned down. It's crazy because I've got to like turn down quite a bit. Got it turned down. Like in OBS, it's saying it's like almost nothing. See, now it's no music. And what would I do without you, Bhaskar, helping me debug my setup? I might just like turn it off. I'm trying to figure this out, but that's all right. I can mess with it another time. I'll just turn it off. That's a bummer. I'll have to do some debugging there. All right. So all right. Well, we'll try the music another time. So you probably couldn't hear anything that I was talking about, so that's hilarious. We'll figure it out. I just have to do some experimenting. You have to do this thing where you route the audio over. You have to like create a virtual device with this program called Loopback, and then route that audio over to OBS. And I guess it's not as simple as I thought it was. So, oh well, I'll figure it out another time. I'll get some advice from my other peeps who stream. I know Chris Biscardi uses background music, and so does Chris Evalea. So I guess if your name is Chris, you like to use background music. So we'll try it. In the meantime, yeah, I know there's a desktop audio source. For some reason, it's disabled. Nothing comes up. I have to use that loopback thing. I've seen that from other streamers as well, that at least on the Mac. I don't know if it's different on a Windows PC, but for some reason you have to like create a virtual input or something. Okay, where was I? So what I was basically saying was that this talk, the tricky thing that's always difficult with writing a talk is that it's really easy to do too much. It's really easy to try to do everything. So I sort of set myself up for that by saying that I was just going to talk about token authentication in NGRX, which is like a really big subject. So what I've been trying to do is narrow down the scope of the talk. And what I've come to decide is basically that I want to basically highlight the differences if you're looking to add authentication to a regular Angular app versus adding it to an NGRX application. So I want to walk people through that thought process of we're going to start the login, we're going to go over to a login provider, and then we're going to do something with when the application gets redirected, which is only a small sliver of the authentication process, but I think that's easily enough for a 25 to 30 minute talk. So I think the real interesting part of authentication in NGRX is that you're breaking it out into all of the different pieces of indirection that you have at NGRX, where you've got some pieces of state changing in the reducers, and then you've got selectors that you can read things like whether you're authenticated in the components or other parts of the app where you're going to need to access that is authenticated or things like that. And then the other part that's really interesting is just how much effects plays a role in authentication in NGRX. Whereas in plain Angular, you sort of have this very thick service that handles a lot of things. Whoa. I guess I've got like a... Oh. Loopback is causing problems. Let me just quit Loopback. I'll try that again another time. All right. In any case, in plain Angular, you have a very thick service that does a lot of things, whereas in NGRX, your authentication service is really just a layer that goes on top of your effects or next to your effects, and the two of them communicate quite a lot. So, thanks for that link, Bhaskar. I'll take a look at that. So that's what I want to walk people through, is this idea that Angular by itself is linear, like walking. NGRX is more like riding a bike. And then we're going to walk through basically adding state. So like I'm going to basically say something like, what state do we need to track? Which basically is the equivalent of saying what goes in the store. Or how do we keep track of stuff? What stuff do we need to keep track of? The idea of the talk is basically that if you sort of hide away all the jargon of authentication and think through it as just as if you were adding a feature, it makes it a little bit easier to manage. So what stuff do we need to keep track of, which means what goes in the store, and that's where we talk about state, not stake. I wish we were talking about stake. And then I remind people of the Sherry principle. And then we start talking about, okay, we're going to start the login. We're going to get logged into the provider. Then we're going to redirect back to the application. And then we're going to have to handle either the success or the error there. And what does success look like? Usually after we're successful, we have to keep track of whether we're authenticated, some sort of user profile, and a token that we're getting back. And I'll mention in the talk that like these things don't all happen at the same time necessarily, but for our purposes, that's what we're trying to accomplish. There's always a balance between how much detail you get into, because it can easily sidetrack you from the main point of the talk. So basically the main point of this talk is that your effects are going to handle a lot of stuff for you. So then I walk through, this is something I may cut, the two types of auth state because it's another point of confusion that people have is um, we're not really talking about, in this situation, we're not really talking about UI state necessarily. The authenticated um, piece of state will drive some of that UI, but we're not like concerned with the state of the login page in this topic. So we're really focused on the auth status, and because of that, we're going to end up with three things in our state: is authenticated, user profile, and access token. And I'll walk through and explain that. I'm going to mention not storing access tokens in local storage, and that luckily the store is really nice for that because we have a place to put it. I should probably add in here that typically what we do in Angular, in plain Angular, is to store these things in the service. That would probably make a lot of sense. So I'll contrast that with I'll just add a text thing real quick. Contrast with Angular service, where we would typically have a welcome Tula Creme. Glad you're here. So in an Angular service, we would keep all this stuff in there, and we'd probably make some sort of behavior subject that will let us set these things and subscribe to them. So I'll probably, probably a good idea to pull in some sample code. Let's go to the Angular quick start for Auth0 and we'll just genericize that. So let's go to quick starts. Just pull this over. And single page Angular. So if we look at the authentication service here, you can see, so we have like a user profile subject and don't we have a, I think there's also an is authenticated subject. I guess not. I guess in this example, we're just setting a class property. So that's probably good. I can show both of those. What about the token? I'm almost positive the token is a subject. We might not have it in, let's see. Oh yeah, this is just it'd be in this one. So updating the authentication service, get token silently. I feel like somewhere in there was a subject for getting the token. I guess we might not need to do that with the new SPA SDK, but I don't want to make this specific to Auth0, so I might just show an example of saying that we've got the is authenticated being a class property that's unobservable. And user profile being a subject, a behavior subject. Something like that. So I'll say something about the so I've got my handy dandy cheat for syntax here, which is just a VS Code project. I guess I should. So the contrasting will be that we're we would store these things either directly on the service as class properties, or we would create some sort of behavior subject so that we could modify them. So I guess I want this, I suspect, is going to get slimmed down later. I tend to just add all of the content, like everything, the whole kitchen sink and everything, and then slim it down once I start rehearsing it, which I'm going to have to start doing like yesterday. So let's go back. Let me pull that same visual. If we go back, it's really important to have continuity in your visuals so that people understand. You know what? It'd probably make more sense to do the Angular piece up here. I'm just trying to think through, like, I really want to contrast. What are the biggest pieces? We want to contrast where we store things. That one is true. That's one of the biggest changes. You're pulling out things that you would keep in your authentication service, either as instance or class variables, or, well, they all end up being class variables, but some of them are just plain old booleans that get turned into observables, and then some of them are like behavior subjects that get set elsewhere in the application. But sort of everything is held in the auth service, basically. So I probably want to do this up here, honestly, and move this up. So I want to say, like, hey, so what stuff do we need to keep track of? Oh wait, no, that's gonna go. We want to go. I want to review the flow. Yeah, I want to do something like this. I want to say, like, these ones don't. I'm going to move this. I may just, let me skip these for now. I'll come back to those. But so I want to review the flow and what we're getting, and then I want to say, like, if we were using this in plain Angular, we would probably just store these things as class properties. So let me write let me grab like a service or something. Or I can just go back to this and grab just do something like this, or I can grab that, and I don't need a lot of this stuff, but I'm going to copy it in. And yikes, that's like obviously way too much stuff, but I don't need most of it. I'm going to get rid of like nearly all of it. I just want a little bit of a don't need any of this. And I don't need, right? This is actually perfect because it's got 3 different things. We've got, I'm going to clean this up, of course. but we've got is authenticated. That's an observable coming from something else. We've got a behavior subject, and we've got just like a Boolean property. So I'm going to rename this to just like auth service. Well, I don't want to show this. This stuff gets confusing and it's not really relevant. So what I want is that's right, because in this that's right. In this, we're not really concerned with this stuff. So in the plain Angular quick start, we're getting the value of this observable and then setting this property, which we're not really doing here. So let me redo this. Is authenticated would go here. And then we've got this behavior subject. So I got to get this formatted correctly. Definitely want to get rid of the background. Make everything regular. And maybe something like something like this, so that we can demonstrate how in the Angular service we've got, let's move this up and move this there. Yeah. So we can show how in the Angular service, I guess I should add the token too. The token will be pretty much the same thing, where we would probably do some sort of behavior subject and then cast it as an observable so that so I'll just call this token subject and call this access token or something like that. And that way I can demonstrate that it's, let's make this color correct. Orange. And move this over. All right, now that's kind of a lot to show. What's the order here? Is authenticated user profile. Okay, cool. So I think this is decent. So I want to do the old magic trick. So I'll say, like, in the auth service, we would, in regular Angular, we would use things like class properties, either directly as Booleans that we would set, or we would have behavior subjects that then get set. So I will mask all this out And I've got a style already that hides things. And then you can basically just walk people through instead of bombarding them with everything that you're doing. Duplicate that and show that we're creating a behavior subject, but then exposing it as an observable. And then we're doing the same thing with the token. And exposing it as an observable. See, this is what I mean. Like this is already going to take up quite a lot of time to walk through this kind of thing. So you really only want to have like 3 things like this. It's really easy to blow through 25 minutes or 30 minutes really quickly. Whoops. And let's see, 1037. Okay, so then I want some transition to say like, instead of doing that, we will use the store. So where's my... I need some sort of transition here to say like, now let's look at NGRX. And then I can say, instead we'll just stick all this stuff in the store. And we've got our things there. So I think, yeah, well, it'll keep coming together. Then we look at, I'm gonna have to make another pass through that to figure out everything that's going on there. But I want to walk people through, that's sort of point 1 is move stuff from the authentication service into the store. So that's one way that your authentication service is slimming down from vanilla Angular to NGRX. Then I'm going to need to... Well, we've said we're doing this, so now we need to figure out how these things actually change and where they change. So how they change is with actions. And so we lead into actions, and we talk about, generally, you're going to have, when you're trying to come up with actions, you're going to look at the events that are happening and the state changes. So let's first cover events. We've got events happening when we log in, when we log into the provider, and when we handle redirect. So we're going to need actions for those. And then we go back and look at state changes and where things will change there. It's really in handle redirect that things actually change, because it's once things are actually logging in, because we're leaving the application here and coming back to the application here. So this is actually where we're going to handle all of our state in the reducers and the effects and dispatch a bunch of actions. So we review that these are the 3 pieces of state, and they're going to be happening mostly in handle redirect. So I need to go get some more code, because we already covered plain handle redirect. So now we need to, it's probably actually better to walk through the fact that there's going to be several different things happening here, because the flow is really going to be, I'm going to have to show this because there's actually a few different things happening here. We're going to redirect the user to a path. We're going to, set whether we're set the authenticated. We're going to go get the user, or we're going to like set the user. Yeah. This sort of depends on the actual implementation, as does getting or setting the token. So we'll probably just sort of say that, let's just assume one way or another, you're going to have to go. It could be more complex or less complex than just handling it all at once. But the point being that we're going to need to handle that flow one way or another, whether we end up calling out to a service to, whether it's, I mean, some things will, some providers will return everything all at once, and some require separate calls. And so that's sort of a detail that doesn't really matter. But one way or another, as a result of the success, we're going to need to impact all of those pieces of state that were authenticated, that we have a user profile, and that we have an access token. And we'll do that with various actions. So I'll show handle redirect success, and then maybe I'll show that the actions that we made for like load user and load user success. And if anybody has any like questions about like building a talk or keynote or other things, I'm just sort of like doing my thing over here, but I'm happy to answer questions on like if you want to know how certain things are like done, or other general advice on things. I'm just going to keep going until somebody has questions. So that's, but if you just want to chill and hang out, that's also totally fine. So we've got load user and load user success. And we've got, here, let's, wonder if I can, the formatting is always really difficult because you want there to be consistency in the formatting, but it's also really hard to not make things look bad. So I really want, I don't really like how close to the edge that is. So I guess I should do this. Formatting code on slides is like the hardest part of building a technical talk. It's just like so awkward to translate syntax to slides. And you want to be careful because you don't want to show too much. If you throw up just like a huge amount of code, then people can't really follow what you're doing. And so you have to be a little bit, you have to really think things through, because, for example, this is just a minor thing that I think about. People are expecting, we're like hardwired for pattern matching, right, as humans. So people are expecting continuity, and it can really throw people off. So for example, if I have on this slide, if I have create action over here, whereas on this one I have it formatted this way, it's going to be harder for people to follow that these are actually the same thing, just two different examples of the same thing. These are the kinds of details that I think about when I'm building a talk. They sort of evolve over time. It's not like if you're building your first talk, I wouldn't let that paralyze you or anything, but just try to keep in mind that people are generally hardwired for patterns and continuity. So making things kind of flow naturally is really important. So let's see, we've got handle redirect success. That's going to handle that target route. I didn't mention the target route anywhere. I should mention it because it's a side effect, which is going to come back later. So I should say like maybe up in here that a side effect of that is that it's going to redirect. Let me add a note right there because I don't really know where to stick that yet, but I know I need to cover it because, again, if you're looking at this in detail, you're going to say, like, what the heck is target route? Where did that come from? I have no idea where target route came from, and all of a sudden it's there. So I want to make sure I lay that foundation. This stuff, that's pretty self-explanatory. Load user success. I'm going to do another one for the check auth set not auth. I still don't like the naming of this. If you've watched any of the other ones, we sort of have this weird situation here where we need things to happen. Like basically anytime the handle redirect success runs, we want to also run this check auth. And then when check auth success runs, we want to load the user. So in this effect here for loading the user, we're listening both for an explicit load user call as well as check auth success. And this to me makes more sense because we know for certain that every time is authenticated is set to true, we want to make sure we have the most recent user. Now we can get away with this because in our example, we're using auth0, which caches things for it. Like it knows if it's got like a stale user, it has to make a call to the server. You might not be able to get away with that unless you implemented some sort of caching, but that's such a detail that I don't feel like it's going to be necessary to talk about it. It's annoying that we have to also... so I could not have this action for setting is authenticated to false. I've been trying to think through, is there ever a time where if this didn't dispatch, is there ever a possibility that is authenticated could be accidentally set to true just because it hasn't been there? The only thing I can think of is if we're doing some sort of silent refresh or something later on. I don't think there's a case where we would necessarily have to explicitly set it to false since that's our initial state. But I kind of also, I don't really like to rely on defaults. I don't really like to rely on doing nothing. And just hope for the best, hope that we don't accidentally implement a bug by not having an explicit set to false. It's sort of like hoping that something is null, and then lo and behold, something comes along and you have a null reference error. It's better. I think it's better to be explicit. But for the purpose of this talk, I might change this naming instead of calling it set check auth success, I might do like set is auth true and like set is auth false or something like that. But at any rate, I'll copy over this pattern and yeah, I think I'll do like I actually might just leave it. I actually think it is a little bit easier to understand like that. It seems redundant. If token is null, you logged out. Yeah, that's true. The tricky thing here is that we're simultaneously we're trying to make sure that our SPA authentication state mirrors the authentication server authentication state. So really what we're checking for here for is authenticated is not necessarily the presence of a token, because what we want to be careful of is not having the app think that we're logged in and display parts of the app that it would only display. Like, is authenticated is more of a gatekeeper for the UI state. The token is really for going and getting protected data. So that's why I kind of don't want to. I probably don't need an action to set it to false, and maybe in this example I don't need it, but I really don't like the idea of just like hoping that it works, because what if there's an edge case where, like when we're dealing with a lot of asynchronous stuff, what if there's a situation where the response comes back and I don't know, there's something, is authenticated is still true, but then our session is expired on the server and we're actually not authenticated anymore. So I don't know. I'd like to mess around with it more. I might mess around with the code more and just see if I can break it if I don't have it set to, if I don't have this action. If I can't break it, then I'll probably remove it. The other thing here is that I only want to call the user if check auth success is true. That's the other reason I dispatch two different actions here. I might have to hammer on this a little bit more and just sort of like kind of think this through. But let's see. Definitely need to make this a bit smaller. Oh, this looks like, seems like we've got some extra spacing there. There we go. Yeah, something like this. I actually probably will like simplify this for the sake of the talk. It's always a balance between like wanting to be accurate but also wanting to keep it simple for people to understand. Sometimes we store more flags and properties while we could have computer properties which are derived from other sets. Yeah, it totally does make sense. And that's why I think there is probably a more elegant way to do it. Probably could compose some selectors together or something to have like some logic for should we go get the user again. And it's basically if is authenticated changes only to true, then yes, we want to go load the user again. Whether that's I mean, really, we only want to use it. We want to change the user if the user is different, but we don't really need to get into that because it's probably the performance difference is negligible. But yeah, I, I feel like there's a little bit of a sticking point here, and so I do want to go kind of look at that. Um, the thing is, I don't want to. It's going to be way too much content to try to walk through the entire life cycle of all three of these properties because there's just so much to cover with NGRX. NGRX is a really challenging subject to teach because there's so much happening at any given time. So, but nonetheless, I think what I'll do is I'll just keep bulldozing forward with just slapping all this in there, and then I'll work through like cutting out a lot of stuff and refining it. So, okay, we've got that. We probably also need one for the token, or like this would probably be like get token get token success and access token. We called this a type of token. Get token success. And this is probably going to be get token failure. Get token failure. And an error with a string, something like that. And I'll go back. I'm not going to add the like dissolves and fades and everything just because I'm still a little uncertain on this section. It's best to add that stuff towards the end just because it's a pain in the rear to have to add all those little animations and transitions and stuff. But at least we've got all the actions kind of hammered out here. When to state change, reducers, defining reducers. So we've got our reducer, we've got load user success, we've got check auth, and then we need to do the same thing for get token success. Get token success, which is going to get access token, change this to orange. Okay. The other thing I've started doing recently, I don't remember if I mentioned this, is like starting to add my Twitter to the bottom right corner because people tend to take a picture of a slide and forget where they saw it. So just a little pro tip. Okay, so this is actually a pretty straightforward section because we know what I do want to explain is like, well, I guess I don't really need to explain it too much. So when we basically, once we get those payloads, what do we do with them? Well, we do it in reducers. So we've got a reducer, we change our user, we change is authenticated, and we change our token. And then how do we read state? We're going to use the selectors for that. We need to define our selectors. And we do that with the exporting out those pure functions, which is like this. And paste that in. Whoa, that was crazy. Why did it do that? It just pasted a table in. I've never seen that. That's crazy. Okay, copy that, go over here. Legacy options. I don't know what that means. Is it gonna bring that again? Let's just do migrate settings. I don't know. Let's worry about that later. Paste that in. What? I've never seen that. I've never seen it like paste in a table. That's absolutely crazy. That's the craziest thing. Maybe I need to add a text. What the heck? Why is that happening? Copy. I'm so confused. Text. Paste. Okay. That was nuts. Okay, so we've got, these are our pure functions. I actually call this access token. Okay. Get rid of the background color. One of these days I'm going to figure out a little macro I can write to remove the background color and remove the italics, but it is not this day. Okay, let's make this easier to read a little bit. Maybe do this. So we got our pure functions here. I don't like that. That's really hard to read. Probably gonna need to do something like this. Yeah. So I'll do that. And just move the function definitions down. Okay, that seems a little bit. So that's, we've got our pure functions. And then we can go get the actual selectors. So it's like this. And then I'm gonna have to rearrange the order. Copy, select all, paste. The thing is, like, it's not really necessary to show, like, if you're implementing the same thing the same way, I don't know how much value there is in showing, like, look, and then I've got this selector, and then I've got this other selector, and then I've got this other selector. So I'll figure it out. I may just need to, like, cut some of this stuff. Maybe I'll pick like the user, and I'll just show the flow. Maybe I'll just say, let's zoom in on the user, and we'll show the actions for the user, we'll show the reducer for the user, we'll show the selectors for the user. Yeah. So I've got a couple slides in here that say, like, using the auth service, and I think before I get to effects, because now we've got sort of all the scaffolding set up, but we haven't actually done anything to change these things. So we need, like, our login methods and our handle redirect callback and like get user. So I think we want to show some code for that, and basically just show that they're just wrappers for the SDK, basically. Let's see. Yeah, so if I pull up our auth service that we've been writing, By the way, it's turned out this has been a very useful project. I've been, for some reason, getting a lot of the NGRX auth article I wrote for Auth0 recently has been getting a lot of traffic, and we've been getting a lot of questions, and it's still not updated for the SPA SDK. So this just turned out to be pretty useful to do this, because now I've got a working example for people. I gotta finish it with the token stuff. Okay, so yeah, again, I want to show some of this stuff. I want to show that like handle redirect callback is a pass through. I basically want to demonstrate that these are pretty much just pass throughs. And if you look at all of these, it's just converting them to observables. If we were using a client that already had observables, we'd literally just be calling the SDK, passing in options and calling the SDK. So so yeah, I want to put some sample code in there that basically just communicates that. So let's see, how can I do this? If I copy this, I'll make a new file, or like I'll just open a new file here. I don't need any of this. I'm not gonna show this. I think what I will show is, well, I'll say something like, that's not really relevant. So I'm just going to, I'll just explain that in the thing. I really don't want to get people bogged down with RxJS code, because RxJS, you throw in a bunch of concat maps and people's eyes are gonna glaze over. So I'm gonna really simplify this, and I'll just say that in the talk that like this is maybe I'll just do this. I'll just do like from or something. Well, that's not gonna be valid. That's not what I want though. I want handle redirect. I want get user, log in and log out. That might make sense. Maybe I should show this. Auth client, get user. I don't want any Auth0 references. Auth client dot login with redirect. Yeah, it's tricky because on the one hand, chances are in the real world you are gonna have to do stuff like this because nowhere provides observables for you out of the box. You basically just have to convert everything to observables. But then at the same time, like, if this is unreadable to people because it's wrapping a bunch of things in from and concat map, and when like really the point is that this is from client.getUser, like really just that's all this is. This is just literally a pass through, but converting it to RxJS. So I think I'll just say in the talk that this is just heavily simplified for the sake of readability, and just say that basically we're doing something like this. each time. Handle redirect callback. I'll just tell people to go look at my sample code to see like a real implementation, because I really don't want to bog people down with the details here. So this dot client auth client, I'll call this auth client everywhere basically. This dot auth client dot, and go ahead and leave that, I guess. That's probably, if they can't read, they can always go to RX documentation. Yeah, I mean, that's true in theory, but man, we've got a really rough go of it in the Angular RxJS NGRX teaching game, because can you imagine trying to show this code? I mean, and this is simplified because it's NGRX. The Angular one is even more complex. I mean, it's very well done. It's elegant, like, and Kim really worked to make it readable. But like showing this to a beginner of like, you're going to create an observable from this client and then call concat map and then call from, like, it's crazy. And I know that not everybody's a beginner, like that's fine. But the point really here is not really the level of education of the level of education of the audience. It's more that it's when you put up code or show some sort of visual, you only have like half a second for people to get what's going on. You have a very short attention span of like, you flash code up on the screen and you're like, and people are trying to think through, okay, what is this that's on the screen? What are they trying to show me? And so the longer, like the more extra crap you have on there, the harder it is for them to get the point. So here, for example, the point is just that we're just changing things into observables and passing them along to the SDK. It's very simple. It's not a it's not like there's not a lot of logic happening in this. So I think I'm going to do something like this for now. Okay. Oh, I don't want to save that. Let's format the document. Format the document with prettier. Okay. Get handle redirect. Get user to log in. That's efficient. This probably won't even fit on a slide, honestly. I'm gonna have to figure out other ways. But I think I can get my point across if I believe in myself. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. Whoops. Yeah, see, that's like way too much. So maybe what I'll do here is just, I'll remove some of these typings. I'll just say this is options. Actually, I'm not even going to do that for now. Just do, oops. Yeah, thanks. Good catch. I don't want to talk about Auth0 in this. because it doesn't really matter. Okay, the spacing in here is really intense. Oh, we're so close. Maybe if I take down the font a bit, can I get if I could get that onto 1, that's pretty close. All right, I don't love that, but it's getting there. Let's see if I could do that. Might work. All right, yeah, that's pretty close. That at least shows what I'm trying to show. Okay, and get rid of that. Get rid of some of these typings just to make it easier to read. Okay. Authentication service will be very thin. Okay. All right. Getting there. We're getting there. So we'll be showing something in there about be nice to show some sort of difference between the Angular method. See, the real difference is that this logic gets moved to an effect, because then these things all get handled by different actions. So it's going to be really hard to show that, though, in like an intelligible way. So I might have to come back to that. Okay, then we would get to where does all the, I guess the idea is we show probably show handle redirect in kind of pseudocode of like check these things, update them, etc. Show handle redirect here. Talk about how it's going to be really thin, and then we say like, well, where do we actually put these things? And that's where we get effects. Like, how do we handle side effects is really what we're saying. How do we handle side effects? And then when you talk about effects, we say, here's our flow. Looks like I need to update some styling here because I fixed the shadows on these. Yep. Okay. Fix the shadows on those. Group. Boom. Okay. Oh man, Josh, it really makes me happy that you like the font because you're the font master. It is Cooper Hewitt, which I think you told me about in the first place. All right. Okay, so I've got, yeah, so then I want to show how we've got, I mean, the login and log outs, well, I guess it's still, yeah, because we're showing the indirection of, we're saying like, when we dispatch the login action, it's actually a side effect to call the auth service login. Nothing's actually changing in state when we call login. We're just calling the auth service. So we're adding this layer of indirection, which then calls this effect, which then we also need to have dispatch false because we're going to get redirected away. And then all the magic happens in the handle redirect effect. So I've got this thing where I sort of expand it. It's really hard to see the animation, but I have a bunch of animations here that, let's see, can I preview it? It's in the next one, I guess, where it moves away like that, and then it'll show this inside. And that way, all I'm showing is the exhaust map, and then I can expand it into showing the actual stuff that's going on inside of the exhaust map. So I got the exhaust map that's calling handle redirect and is dispatching either handle redirect success or handle redirect failure. I was working on this last night. So that one's largely done, and I just walked through all the different pieces of it to explain it. I never really talked about failure methods here. I mean, earlier I didn't talk about the failure actions. I should probably do that for the sake of completeness. We'll get there. I'll go back and do this. Okay, and then I've got handle redirect success, which is what dispatches that action, or which handles the side effect of going to another URL. So maybe actually, as I'm talking about this out loud, which is the whole reason I'm doing these streams, I'm an external processor. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but I have to think things through out loud, which is confusing because I'm also a very introverted person. I like to be alone. So streaming is kind of best of both worlds. I get to be alone in my house. Well, I mean, Amy's in another room, but I get to be alone in my office, and yet I can externally process everything. But now that I think about it, way up at the beginning, I think actually a good way of talking about this is, instead of going back to the idea of like taking a walk versus riding a bike, what we really want to think through is like, hey, thanks for the compliment on the teaching. I really appreciate that. It's I love teaching more than anything else. Like, I don't actually particularly enjoy building the talk itself. Like, I'm not artistic at all. I've like basically just begged, borrowed, and stolen every slide technique that I have. I don't have that, like, I think in music, not in art. So, but I love teaching itself. I just don't like building slide decks. But I love like workshops and video. I love making video tutorials. I love teaching people how to code. Like, to be honest, kind of love that. I kind of love teaching people how to code more than actually coding, which is sort of weird. But same with like teaching people about speaking and teaching to get really meta. Anyway, I'm rambling now, but okay, what I was starting to say was, though, I think what we need to explain up here is that you need to think of these things in terms of defining side effects, because that's one thing that's really confusing, is like you have to determine what's a piece of state you're tracking and what's a side effect of like those things happening. I think that's what makes authentication in NGRX, and I imagine Redux, uh, confusing, because in vanilla Angular, you don't really have to make that distinction at all. All you have to really do is sort of, it's just like everything's in the same dimension. You sort of have, you do like click login, go log in, you come back and set all the things. Like it's very linear. Whereas like technically something like redirecting is a side effect. Calling an outside service is a side effect. It doesn't actually affect the state of your application. So I think that's the mental model that I want to try to explain in this talk, is that which my hope is that, like, if I can figure out the way to explain this, my hope is that it's actually the same thought process for any feature that you have to add. And that's what makes authentication so intimidating, is it feels like it's like this big scary thing. It's really just another feature, just like if you were adding like a new like CRUD feature, like you got to think through, like, where's my state? What state do I need to keep track of? Where's my state changing? What kind of side effects are happening? Like, when I do this thing, what other things have to happen? Josh says, at least NGRX has some built-in capabilities to handle side effects. In Redux, you either have to pull in some third-party library or just kind of pretend they're not happening. Yeah, I will say, I really like effects in NGRX. I really like them a lot. I think they're easy to follow, because it's an explicit place. I haven't, to be honest, even though I've been delving a lot more into React, I haven't done very much with Redux. I've mostly been doing stuff with context. I've done a little bit, but like now with hooks, I'm basically using like use effect and yeah, basically like the effect hook, the state hook, that kind of thing. So I haven't had to do, I know, what's that one that you use in React? Thunk? Is that what, or Plunk? What? Thunk? That's one. Because Brian Holt goes over some of it. Yeah, I don't know. One learns Redux and knows Redux. One learns NGRX and knows Redux and RX. Sounds like a big one. Yeah, I mean, it is kind of nice. Like, the learning curve for Angular, NGRX, and RxJS is really steep, but I feel like you get a lot for it. you get it's a big investment to get into this, but then you can do like some really sophisticated stuff. Oh yeah, Redux Sagas. That's the other one. One of my coworkers did a tutorial on Redux Saga, and I went through that, and that was all right. I mean, his tutorial was great, but I just mean Redux Saga. So yeah, I want to get people thinking through the state and the side effects, and I think that's what will tie together everything down to the effects. I really did myself a bamboozle here by picking like an extremely broad topic. Note to self: don't tell a conference organizer you're going to talk about like an entire subject in 30 minutes. So I should have defined this a lot better ahead of time, but it is what it is. And I'm giving this talk in a couple different conferences, so it's worth the effort. And I'm gonna turn this into a whole lot of content, both for Auth0 and for my own personal stuff. I'm gonna record some Egghead videos and stuff like that. So, and probably maybe somewhere else. So it's worth it. It's just, it's a lot. It's a lot to think through. Okay, so I mean, the effects thing was, when I did the 10-minute talk, the 10-minute version of this, I put a lot of focus on that. So this section is actually pretty close to done. I wish I could get some advice on what to cut out from some of this stuff. This is old. I can get rid of this. This is the end. This is not going to be the same. NGRX auth. NGRX auth. Yeah, I really like hooks. I've been doing a little bit of content on Auth0's hooks wrapper that they're working on, and it's really nice. It's really easy to understand. It took me a minute. I'm actually going to go, it's going to sound like blasphemy, but I'm actually going to Ryan Florence's React training workshop tomorrow and Friday in Portland. So I'll be doing 2 full days of like intensive React training for work, which is funny to me. But at this point in my career, I have to know both. I can't really just specialize in one just because like the world is using. I mean, at some point, I'll probably have to learn Vue too, but Angular and React seem to be the two biggest that I need to focus on. But all right, so let's go. Let me go back and take a high level view of this. Let me actually use that light table mode that I showed last time and just sort of look through this because I want to get a feel. I know it is scandalous, Josh. And here I've been so Angular focused. It's good though. I like doing both. It's a lot of fun. It also gives you, I mean, you got to go where the work is, right? Like Angular has a very specific niche, and I love Angular and the Angular community and NGRX, but internally we use React, and there's a lot of demand for React content. So what are you gonna do? I'll just keep doing both. So okay, I start the talk. My plan is basically to tell a story of how like you finally got your head around NGRX and you demo something to your boss, like an MVP for a new project at work, and your boss is like, this is cool, but like, how do I log in? And you realize that you've completely forgotten about authentication, which like makes you feel like a deer in the headlights. I found this Angry Beavers gif that I really like. And so you freak out because authentication is a big scary subject with lots of jargon. I mean vocabulary. And also NGRX is a big scary subject with lots of jargon. I mean vocabulary. And you're not really sure where things go. And it turns out that implementing authentication in NGRX is different than in plain Angular, and it can be really intimidating. So that's what we're going to talk about. And then I introduce myself, and then I say, yeah, so it looks really different. So we're going to walk through like a thought process, a different way of thinking about adding any feature to an NGRX application, but specifically authentication as the example of that. That's sort of what I want. Is like I want there to be this meta level of like we're gonna use NGRX, but I want to teach you a pattern of thinking that will apply to anything. More or less. I mean, obviously there's like really gnarly use cases and complex event-driven stuff, but for the sake of like teaching people how to think about reducers and effects and stuff like that. Yeah, the library framework, whatever, is harder than ever. React, Angular, Vue, Svelte, Flutter, Web. Yeah, I know. There's a lot. I mean, I think thankfully, like, things are generally closer to each other than they used to be. Like, we're sort of in this time where I think people roughly agree on like one-way data flow and there's tendency to use more functional stuff, although in Angular that's not really, I mean, NGRX sort of introduces a lot of functional stuff to Angular. It's still a very heavily object oriented, but there's changes to Angular that are happening that are going to allow like optional dependency injection and stuff like that. So that could be interesting. Okay, so then we're gonna look at, okay, let's think through what's the login process. So we're gonna say we click login, we go to the provider, we handle redirect, we have a success and a failure, and that's the same. This part is the same in regular Angular. whether you're using promises or observables or whatever. And so we want to think through, if we were doing this in plain Angular, we'd have an auth service that would handle a lot of stuff for us, that would talk to the components, and then also interact with the data services, usually through some sort of interceptor. In NGRX, this looks really different. The auth service sort of slides in next to effects, and we have our reducers and components and selectors. So the difference here is it's like walking versus biking, where walking is very linear. Biking, there's a lot of moving pieces. But like the chains and the tires have to go forward. They all affect each other, but you can cover a lot more ground. So somewhere in here, I should talk about this concept of state and side effects, and how you have to start breaking down any new feature into state and side effects. I'm not sure whether I'm actually going to show this diagram of all the different pieces of NGRX. I don't necessarily think it adds anything, so I'm going to skip it for now. Originally I was going to cover like adding the authentication module. Because that stuff is confusing, adding a module and adding a feature module and all that stuff. But it also doesn't really have, like, it doesn't actually pertain to this particular talk. So I think I'm going to skip that as well. So we want to think of, what do we keep track of? And, what goes in the store, which we then talk about state. And a brief reminder on the Sherry principle. Review our flow. Somewhere in there, maybe up here, it's almost like I need to go back through this and say, like, do the whole, like, define the state, define the side effects, because before I even get into the store, because what I want to say is that here is where this is sort of where a lot of stuff happens. So we've got side effect here, get redirected to the provider, or like call the login stuff there. This is out of our control. And then side effect here is like calling out to process the redirect. Side effect here is redirecting either to the protected page that you wanted, or to some sort of like error or, home page or something like that. So we want to define the pieces of state, and we want to define the side effects. And then once we've done that, then we come back to defining the state and putting them in the store. And we talk about the success is where pretty much all the state changes are going to happen. So in that, we're going to have a nice little animation that like brings those up, and talk about is authenticated and user and token. Then we talk about, like, if we were implementing this in regular Angular, we'd have like an auth service, and these things would just be on the class itself, either as straight up booleans or as behavior subjects that get turned into observables. Whereas, why not mimic how the bike works? Like, chain is the store, error is the brakes. Yeah. Yeah, there might be a good way to like keep that analogy going. Laser 696969 is calling me a living legend. I don't think I'm even close to a living legend. I don't, but thank you for the compliment. I would say I'm more like a living normal guy. But thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And Tully, my Nutella friend, my Nutella off-brand friend. I think that's a decent idea. I'll have to ponder that. Mike Ryan is also a big fan of analogies, and he always comes up with some really good ones. I haven't really thought through whether the bike is good. I guess it could be. Let's see. What's the side effect? What's the correlation of the bike to the side effect? I'm also learning to code to earn infinite money. That's good. What Laser? I'm just gonna call you Laser. Where are you at in the learning to code process? I'd be curious to know. And what are you learning right now? Are you learning front end, back end, JavaScript, Angular, React? Um, I I think it's complete. I mean, I don't know why there's sort of this weird, like, learning to code for money is like a completely acceptable answer. Like, that's why we learn anything to get a job, right? Like yes, there's like an element of like, oh, I love programming or whatever, but like honestly, like that was a big part of it for me in the beginning. Was like I was in this dead end finance job and uh really didn't like how my life was going, and knew that there was going to be a really big ceiling to how much money I could make and everything. And it was just I didn't want to do it anymore. I mean, I had done a little bit of HTML and CSS, and I remembered how much I liked it. And then the people I happened to work at a company that had in-house developers, and all of them really helped me and gave me a lot of resources. Um and like, yeah, I mean, I I think I almost doubled my salary going to web development, something like that. Somewhere, maybe not quite. Maybe it was like a third more my first job, but like that's no joke. Like that's not a small going from like basically a customer service job in finance to web development. That's a big deal. Laser says I'm learning web development with things like HTML, CSS, JS, React, Express, Postgres. Yeah, that's great. That's really great to hear. Um, Everything. So a lot of JavaScript, which is good. HTML and CSS, you kind of have to know. Postgres is awesome. Love Postgres. So yeah, sort of doing the React stack. I think that's a really good call. Like it's crazy as much as I love Angular. Um, I would definitely like. I think newer people who are just trying to get a job, you gotta just learn React. You just gotta learn HTML, CSS, and React, basically. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then add on React to it. I mean, that's just the fastest way to get employed, basically. Just added one web app online. Awesome. Yeah, luckily nowadays there's a lot of good resources out there. Freecodecamp.org is probably the best, I would say, for just getting started if you're not familiar. I'll go ahead and just pull it up just so people know. But yeah, freecodecamp.org is the best ever, because you can do all kinds of great stuff there, and it's totally free. Okay, let's get back to this biking analogy. How far can we take this biking analogy? We've got yeah, Laser, it's tricky. It's sort of a catch-22, right? Like you need a portfolio to get a job, but you need a job to get portfolio projects. So you end up sort of having to invent projects for yourself. And the personal portfolio is the absolute like best first thing you can do, because you have complete control over it. And so you can make something cool with whatever technology you know, and add commits to it on GitHub to demonstrate your progress. And I think the most important thing for newer people is to start learning in public as fast as possible, because then you have a proven track record of what you're doing. So usually Git is the best, like GitHub is the best way to do that. So great idea. Okay, so I'm not sure. There's not really. Is there a concept of a side effect when you're biking? like the chain turns. Am I a senior web developer? I guess so. I suppose I would be considered a senior web developer. I don't really know. What does that term mean anymore? I mean, I'm somewhere in the 5 to 6 year mark of like professional, quote unquote, professional development. I did know HTML and CSS before that, though. I had learned that when I was younger. But I mean, I've got some accolades at this point, so I guess I would consider myself a senior web developer. Years of experience aren't always a good indicator of that because I've done a lot of stuff in the last few years. Yeah, I don't know. The pedals directly change the wheels, which then the gears. I guess there are side effects in a bike. I think I'm forgetting. Laser asks, do you also work with React or Angular? I actually do both. I started in Angular, and I just happened to, it just sort of was where I could find a job at the time. And I got really into Angular. I did a lot with Angular, but then my current job uses a lot of React, and there's a lot of React out there right now. So I do both at the moment. Don't apologize, Suli Krem. It's a good thought. I had thought about it too. It's always hard with an analogy. Like if it's not quite right, then but I have to give it some more thought because it would be really ideal. What might make the most sense? It might make more sense to work backwards and come up with an analogy that I can use that does have side effects, and then compare and contrast the two that way. So instead of saying walking and biking, maybe there's another way I can explain it. Or if I can think of a correlation between the side effects. I mean, I guess it's a side effect that it is a really good analogy for indirection. Yeah, I'll have to ponder that. Can I review your web app? It'll take less than a minute. Sure, throw the link up. Why not? I'm wrapping up here. It's almost been 2 hours anyway. Let's take a look at it. Let me yeah. I mean, whether it's good or bad, that's a hard question. But I can you may as well post the link, and we can all look at it and try to give you some constructive feedback on what to do with it. I don't mind. I'm mostly just hanging out. I'm probably gonna go get some lunch in a little later. I don't know. But yeah, throw the link in, Laser, and let's pull it up and look at it. If you also have a link to the code, be my guest. Let's see. Let me open it over here. Spinning up your Heroku. Nice. So you learned how to deploy something to Heroku. That's smart. Yeah, Heroku does take a while to spin up. You might have a better experience on Netlify if you want to look at Netlify. Okay, so you built basically an app here. So you used Create React App. So great. I mean, it's looking really good. You've got did you do all the styling yourself? It's like really nice styling. Or was it like a theme that you found? Cuz the styling is like, it looks really nice for this being like your first project. Wow. I mean, this is like really impressive if you're like just getting going. I would say the one very tiny. Wow, CSS from scratch. You're like already ahead of me. I am terrible at CSS. I'm like self-admittedly I need to probably what I should do is do some streams of me learning CSS. I mean, I know CSS, but I mean, this is nice. This is good. Uh, Make sure you go change your title. You've still got the default Create React app. So that's the only little minor details to go change that. You've also still got the Create React app favicon. So, but it looks like you've already got a logo, so you could just make that the favicon right there, and change the title to Planet Spinach. Yeah, let's look at your responsive. It's really not bad though. I mean, like as far as the responsive, it might be nice to have your hamburger menu you might do a little bit with, but honestly, like this is like pretty dang impressive for like being one of your first apps. That's like pretty great. You've even got like please log in. Nice. You could take a look at not that I'm biased, but you could take a look at adding Auth0 as your first actual login. Might be a fun experiment. Yeah, this is good stuff. Great job. Yeah, it seems like so update these couple things. You might want to change with the responsive stuff. So the hamburger menu looks really good when it takes up the full thing when it's small. You might want to have it take up only a piece of the screen when it's in a browser. But like, yeah, these are really nice. Login. I really like that. That's a really nice little touch. Yeah, that's really cool. Wow, that's impressive. Great job. So yeah, I would change this stuff. Maybe update some of the responsive stuff. If you want to like learn more about authentication, you could try to set this up with Auth0, or I mean, it could be any free provider or like any free tier of a provider. But obviously, I work for Auth0, so. Is the code up on GitHub? Do you want us to take a look at the code? We can take a peek and just see kind of what's going on. But like the design is good. Looks like you're doing a lot of console logging, as we all do, and see what's on. Oh, you're using Shopify. That's cool. So you've got like let's see. Oh, okay. So you haven't minified anything, so we can actually just kind of pull up this code. Nice. So, you're using Redux. Wow. And you got yeah. I mean, obviously I'm just like taking a glance. But cool. Images from the other e-commerce site. Nice. So is it going and getting this it's going and getting this stuff from an API somewhere? Pages. Authentication. Or is it just getting product actions? Get all category list. Oh, there's no Shopify because I don't know how to use Shopify. Oh, okay. I saw Shopify in the, maybe that's where the, there's some images coming from there. That's what it is. I just saw Shopify over here. So the Express background is what's actually like, or the Express backend is what's actually going in. Basic Postgres database. Yeah, that's really cool. Where is your like data layer here? Let's see. Product reducer. Like where are you actually calling? You got the store. Got your components. Category routes. Cool. So you got your router there. Got your product actions. Got your product reducer. Loader. Product preview. Map state to props. So where are you actually going and getting your data? Where are you calling your backend? Is it single category, single product? On product request. So you're passing in calling it in a Redux action. Oh, okay. That makes sense. This is what Josh was saying earlier about, I see. Yeah, that's difficult in React. See, in Angular, this would live in an effect because it's actually a side effect. But in React, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. That makes sense. That makes sense. I need to dig a little bit deeper into the different different side effect strategies you have for React. But yeah, I mean, this is very very impressive as a newer developer. You could probably, I mean, I'm sure there's ways that you can like refactor the code a little bit and kind of do things more efficiently, but certainly like looks pretty well organized. It's not like a lot of newer folks will kind of pile everything into small, like a bunch of, or like less files. So it seems like you're following the conventions of like the components and everything pretty nicely. Neat. Yeah, well, it is noon. If you want to throw the link to the code up, be my guest. I'm gonna have to call it here in a second. But thanks for sharing your project. I think you're doing a great job. Can definitely keep up the good work there. While we're waiting there, let's just go back. So I think, I mean, we're definitely making progress on this talk. I need to think through a little bit more. It's becoming really, it's quite large now. It's like 120 slides. So I'm gonna have to keep thinking through like how I can simplify it. But this at least moves the needle. I have to finish this by next week. No problem. Next time I'm on and you happen to be on, Laser, just hop back on and we'll keep going through it, or we'll look at it. No problem. I'm around. I'm also on Twitter. But yeah, thanks everyone for no problem, Laser. It's no big deal. We'll do it another time. Yeah, thanks everyone. Appreciate you hanging out. Doesn't look like any of my normal people are streaming right now, so I don't really have anywhere to send you. Let me go over to Live Coders really quick and see if any of those peeps are on. We got Game Dev. We got, let's go, Ravenfall. I don't know what these things are. TypeScript. TypeScript with music. That sounds cool. I mean, there's also game development. We'll go over to I Am Fletcher. You're welcome, Laser. Add that in a portfolio for junior. Yeah, you definitely should. Definitely put. Yeah, make sure it's up on. Oh, good. John Lundquist just started streaming. Perfect. Yes, definitely put that in your portfolio. I mean, you can. I mean, you obviously will be clear that it's not like you didn't get paid by a client to do it, but like that's a totally legit project to have in your portfolio. So, and yeah, make sure the code is up on GitHub, and yeah, you'll be good to go. Yeah. All right. Thanks everyone. I'm going to send you over to John. But yeah, Laser, you're welcome. You're very welcome. Keep me posted. Hopefully, good luck with getting a job. I think the hardest part is just like having sticking with the motivation and the accountability and stuff like that. But yeah, thanks everyone.